Audiences are split on whether Glass, the third part of M. Night Shyamalan's grounded superhero trilogy, is a fitting conclusion to the series. Yippee-ki-yay, movie lovers, I'm Jan, and in this video I'm explaining everything you need to know about the ending to Glass and that surprise twist, plus some crucial details and hidden messages you might have missed. Obviously spoilers ahead, so take care if you haven't seen the movie yet. Twist endings are M. Night Shyamalan's trademark, and Glass is no exception, with an ending that's likely to be divisive among the audience. The final showdown that Mr. Glass, aka Elijah Price, has set up outside the hospital sees the Beast take on David Dunn, who's known as the Overseer. Elijah wants to reveal the existence of superheroes to the world, but when Kevin and David are both killed by guards called in by Sarah Paulson's Dr. Staple, the movie reveals that Dr. Staple has actually been working for a secret society that suppresses superpowered individuals and aims to keep their existence under wraps. The idea for this twist goes back to 1999 when Shyamalan was working on the script for Unbreakable, and among his file of notes for that film, he wrote down the question, how come nobody knows about these superheroes? The answer, of course, is this secret society which has been concealing the existence of superheroes in the world for around 10,000 years, and this revelation basically confirms Elijah's comic book theory that he expressed in Unbreakable.
The Egyptians drew on walls. Countries all over the world still pass on knowledge through pictorial forms. I believe comics are a form of history that someone somewhere felt or experienced.
Despite Kevin and David having been murdered in Glass, Dr. Staple explains to Elijah that comics are wrong about secret groups being evil because the secret society she works for doesn't choose sides. Rather, their goal is to maintain balance and order in society, as it's not fair to have gods among ordinary human beings. The problem, as Dr. Staple sees it, is that whenever one superpowered individual pops up, his or her opposite also then appears, and the situation escalates. The Unbreakable Split and Glass trilogy demonstrates that perfectly. Unbreakable was the origin story of David Dunn as a super strong and powerful hero, and Split, which was a secret sequel, was about the emergence of the supervillain, the Beast. These two characters then face off directly in spectacular fashion at the beginning of Glass, with Dunn hunting down and battling the Beast when he rescues the cheerleaders kidnapped by the Horde. By the way, the showdown between these two in Glass was foreshadowed all the way back in Unbreakable when the young Elijah unwrapped his first comic book, The Battle with Jaguaro. Dunn, who wears a green poncho, is represented by the caped hero on the left, and the Beast, aka the Horde, whose signature colour is yellow, is Jaguaro on the right. Interestingly, in Glass, we discover that Elijah is not only responsible for David's existence as a superpowered individual, but also for the Beast, because the train derailment that Elijah caused in Unbreakable, and which only David survived, also killed Kevin's father, which in turn led to the creation of the Horde inside Kevin. Elijah proudly proclaims that by engineering this event, he's a mastermind who creates superheroes. And in another curious connection between David and the Beast, David's son Joseph went to the same school as Casey and the two girls abducted in Split. Now, the way the secret society in Glass operates is that they move from city to city, identifying superpowered individuals, and they have a process for dealing with them which Dr. Staple claims is humane. They begin by gaslighting the individuals, in other words, trying to convince them that they have delusions of grandeur, as Dr. Staple attempted to do with Elijah, David and Kevin at the psychiatric hospital. She almost succeeded with David and the Horde, with David beginning to doubt his powers and Patricia telling Elijah that her Horde is losing faith. The second stage that Dr. Staple employs with individuals like Mr. Glass who refuse to be convinced is to perform a kind of lobotomy and remove or eliminate a part of their brain. She attempts the medical procedure on Elijah, but unbeknown to her, when he broke out of his cell the night before, he went into the surgery room and sabotaged the equipment so it didn't do anything to him during the procedure. The final stage the society undertakes in the event of the first two failing is to completely eliminate the individual, which is what happens when David and Kevin are taken out by the society's henchmen. By the way, there was a chilling bit of foreshadowing in one of the Glass trailers of how Dr. Staple held David Dunn's hand and watched on while he was drowned in the puddle.
So you're not going to shake my hand and let me walk out of here?
And it was even foreshadowed in the scene from Unbreakable when David says to Elijah,
"Two skinny little kids were fooling around in a pool dunking me and I swallowed some water. They didn't know it and it almost killed me." Heroes don't get killed like that. Normal people do, right?
And if you're unclear how the Beast could be killed with a bullet after he survived 2 at close range in Split, what happened was that Casey embraced the Beast, and through her connection with Kevin and by saying his full name repeatedly, Kevin was able to take the light from the Beast. That meant that Kevin no longer had super thick skin like the Beast, so when the sniper shot him, it injured him as it would any ordinary human being. In terms of who the secret society might represent, it's not made explicit in the movie, but there is a hint via the shamrock tattoo that Dr. Staple, the henchman, and the members who meet at the restaurant have near their wrist. Clovers were considered magical plants in Celtic culture, and there are legends of St. Patrick using a 3-leaved clover to explain what the Christian Holy Trinity symbolised. If we think of clovers as having a magical or spiritual meaning, the secret society's clover tattoos may signify how the organisation is dedicated to suppressing magical or godlike powers in society. Shyamalan himself, in fact, has said that what makes us different is our strength, but Dr. Staple believes in the status quo. She believes in the way that it is right now, and she can't see past that. There is still one final twist in this story, and although Dr. Staple told Elijah his theory was right all along, it seemed like she contained the situation at the hospital, even if it meant Elijah, Kevin and David all ended up dead. However, as we know, Elijah is a Lex Luthor-style genius and even calls himself a mastermind. And the night that Elijah broke out of his cell after switching his sedatives for aspirin, he reprogrammed the security cameras so they'd send all recorded footage off-site. Then, during the outbreak, Elijah deliberately took the Beast through the basement, as he knew that that area was monitored with cameras and that the parking lot fight would all be caught on camera too. In the final scenes of the movie, Elijah's mother, Joseph and Casey receive the footage and agree to upload the evidence to the internet for anyone to see. A couple of hours later, they meet at a location that's been crucial throughout the trilogy, the train station, and the movie ends as we see the footage start to go viral, popping up on people's phones and devices and on the TV news. And in a nice little final nod to the 3 fallen supers, at the end of the film, Mrs. Price, Casey and Joseph are each dressed in the signature colours of Elijah, purple, Kevin, yellow, and David, green. As these scenes play, we hear Elijah's voiceover telling us there are unknown forces that don't want us to realise what we are truly capable of. I believe that if everyone sees what just a few people become when they wholly embrace their gifts, others will awaken. Whoever these people are who don't want us to know the truth, today they lose. The real message that Shyamalan seems to want to tell us in Glass is that difference is a strength, and extraordinary abilities are within the grasp of many people. On top of that, the 3 films Unbreakable, Split and Glass exist to prove there can be grounded and realistic superhero stories that are different to the more fantastical superhero stories we typically see in franchises like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and many other comic book movies. In Unbreakable and Glass, Elijah always emphasises that although real-life superheroes exist, they look very different to those in comic books.
The thing to notice about this piece, the thing that makes it very, very special, is its realistic depiction of its figures. When the characters reached the magazine, they were exaggerated, as always happens. It's all right to be afraid, David, because this part won't be like a comic book. Real life doesn't fit into little boxes that were drawn for it.
In Glass at one point, Elijah says this is not a cartoon, this is the real world. And just before Pierce is killed by the Beast, he jokes that
this is where they would paint you with big eyes and bubbles of confusion above your head.
The Osaka Tower, where Elijah threatens to stage the final showdown, is referred to as a true marvel, in a wink to the famous comic book publisher and movie studio. So when it's revealed that Elijah's threat is just a ruse and the showdown was always planned in the less showy setting of the hospital car park, Shyamalan is deliberately pointing out that this isn't meant to be a big-budget superhero blockbuster with an epic CGI finale where the hero goes home after defeating the villain. This choice is perhaps one of the reasons why some viewers haven't enjoyed the movie's ending. After all, some fans have been waiting nearly 2 decades for the sequel to Unbreakable, and since then we've all been exposed to a deluge of superhero movies. And big budget comic book movies are typically the most hyped tentpole releases right now. Glass kicked off with a thrilling start as Dunn rescued the cheerleaders from the Beast, but the rest of the movie played out more like a slow burn psychological thriller, and I suspect some in the audience were indeed hoping for the final showdown to take place on the Osaka Tower. So when instead 2 of the main characters are killed in a much more understated fashion by some nameless henchman from a secret society, that's bound to provoke a reaction. The thing is though that that's what the movie wants to do. It's pointing out that real life heroes and villains don't have these epic fights, and these characters aren't invincible. The low-key nature of the final showdown in Glass is also in keeping with the feel of both Unbreakable and Split, so it would have been odd for the film to suddenly pivot to an epic climax on top of a shiny skyscraper. The movie intends to subvert flashy superhero tropes, and instead prove that the big spectacles we see on film or in comic books are just an exaggerated version of more realistic, yet still extraordinary powers people can have in real life. In light of this, it's also interesting that on her desk, Dr. Staple has a book by Euripides, a playwright in ancient Greece whose tragedies are often noted for their realistically drawn characters, psychological realism, and mythical heroes portrayed as ordinary people living through extraordinary situations. Glass doesn't achieve the brilliance of Unbreakable and falls into Shyamalan's trap of inserting too much exposition into the mouths of his characters. There's an overabundance of explaining literally what we've just seen or are about to see on screen. For example, when Mrs. Price comes on to tell us that this is what they call the showdown, it seems a pretty redundant line to have in a movie released in 2019, given that almost everyone will be familiar with comic book movies by now. And Shyamalan has some great actors in his film, but his insistence on sticking firmly to his script and generally not allowing actors to improvise also seems to lead to some rather clunky lines. Something that fans were inevitably interested in is whether Glass represents the final chapter in the Unbreakable and Split universe. Obviously all the main characters are dead, however the final scene implies we'll see new heroes and villains emerge, and any of those could be explored in future movies or a TV show. So far, Shyamalan has said he's not particularly keen for another follow-up, as with the exception of this trilogy, he generally doesn't do sequels. Glass is also supposed to be a satisfying conclusion to the series, and for me, it seems in keeping with the idea of a grounded superhero series not to expand it out into a much larger franchise. Now, what do you think about the end of Glass, and what were your favourite or least favourite parts of the movie? Let me know in the comments below. If you're new here and enjoyed this, then every week I have new movie breakdowns, so do subscribe and hit the bell to get all my new videos. There's another Glass video on the way, and you can tap left to watch that as soon as it's ready, or tap right for another video you're sure to like. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Yippee-ki-yay, movie lovers!